Yes. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you can hear me and see my screen. Oops. But this is just the plan for today. So there's a little bit of lecture material, more introductory stuff. And then we're going to have, talk about the diversity of social systems with some examples. And I've got a bunch of videos. I hope they come through well through Zoom, through our internet connections. And then at the end, we'll do a little activity where you'll collect a little bit of data on, each of you will collect data on a different species, and we'll kind of look at the diversity of social systems. And then we'll go to breakout rooms and do a bit of discussion on the 3 readings for this week. I am thrilled that there's like 3/4 of the class is here at a like super early time slot on a Friday morning. Probably pretty similar to the attendance we'd get in person for this time. Okay, so the part where we do the activity and discussion, that won't be recorded. Okay, so just a few updates. This link is also on Brightspace, this one up here, and this is where I'm putting the recorded lectures. So just to remind you, for next Wednesday, we won't meet on Zoom, but you can watch the pre-recorded lecture in the playlist that's linked there. Also, I set up an optional Discord group. The link to join is there on the slide, and it's also like on the main course home of Brightspace, just as a place to chat. You can also message the TA or me on there. And I just recommend that you download the app before you join the group. It just seems like that solves issues. So a bunch of you joined already, so that's great. Okay. A few updates on the course. So students were asking about the midterm and exam on Wednesday. So it was important to make a decision for how those were going to work. So I've just decided that the midterm and exam will be online. Even if we go back to in person, we'll hold the tests online and we'll make them open book. So open book means you can use any resources you want, as long as the work you submit is your own and has to be written in your own words. And it's designed to be a test of your individual learning. So it is not permitted to post the questions or your answers from either the midterm or the exam. So that's the kind of main rule. So anything goes except for that. And then my plan is that I'll have the midterm, it'll end on Wednesday, March 2nd at the end of our scheduled class, but I'll open it the day before. So it will be kind of like a take-home exam, and it will be timed. Like I think I'll allow, the normal 80 minutes or something like that. But you can start it like Tuesday night if you want, because I don't know, that probably works better for a lot of you. Okay, and the final exam, its date will be determined by the university, but I'll probably do something similar. So it will all happen on Brightspace, online open book. If you have any questions, just you can put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. Okay. So moving into the lecture material. So we talked about this a little bit already on Wednesday, but to begin with, what is social behavior? So social behavior is just interactions between 2 or more individuals. A social interaction often has directionality, like the example of the grooming monkeys shown on this slide, where there's an actor and a recipient. So there's like one individual doing something to another, but not always. There's a lot of social interactions that are not directional. And as evolutionary biologists, we often want to think about what are the fitness costs and benefits of a given social interaction. So both the actor and the recipient could have costs and benefits as a result of that interaction or that relationship. Okay, so as we said on Wednesday, social behaviors include many different contexts, from aggression to parental care to cooperation, foraging, grooming, migration and movement, courtship, and communication. These are just the ones I could think of. I'm sure there's more. They vary a lot in scale. The scale of social behavior ranges from simple dyads, like this pair of mating fruit flies, up to things that require a large group to perform, like this bridge building behavior of these army ants. That's a phenomenon that requires many individuals to be accomplished. So they're forming this bridge with their bodies so that their colony members can pass on a particular route. Okay, so what is social evolution? The narrow definition is a subdiscipline of evolutionary biology that's concerned with social behaviors that have fitness consequences for at least one individual other than the actor. However, oh, and you'll see, or we saw on Wednesday again, that these can be categorized into these 4 general categories, although that's difficult often. But I prefer to have a broader definition that social evolution is the study of any phenomena that involve social behaviors, collective behaviors, or the properties of social groups. And the reason I want to make a case for this broader definition is that I want to include things that are not heritable and things that have no bearing on fitness, but that can be important or interesting for other reasons. So I think it's important not to limit what our interests are to only things that are heritable and have fitness consequences. The most exciting research to me is research that integrates across levels of biology, from looking at the behaviors and their fitness consequences to their mechanistic causes as well, like the physiology that creates social behaviors. Okay, so coming back to that, those 4 categories. So like in a really kind of idealistic framework, if we're talking about behaviors that have fitness consequences, we can bin them into these 4 types, right? So this matrix lays out the 4 possibilities of having positive or negative effects on both the actor or the donor and the recipient of a given behavior. Now, of course, this again assumes that the behavior we're looking at is directional, but you could, if it wasn't directional, you could just replace these labels with like individual 1, individual 2. So behaviors that are beneficial to both individuals involved are called cooperation. But if a behavior is beneficial to the recipient, but costly to the actor, like if I give money to Charlotte, that's altruistic, right? Because I'm costing myself and benefiting Charlotte. If a behavior is beneficial to the actor, but costly to the recipient, if I take money from Charlotte, that's selfish. And if a behavior is, if the actor does something that hurts the recipient and hurts themselves, that's called spite. And that's thought to be difficult to evolve. So yeah, evolutionary biologists and theoreticians like to think about like, how could these different kinds of behaviors evolve? But in the real world, it's a lot messier than this. It's often very difficult to actually figure out with a real behavior which one of these things it is. And in fact, I think that it's a real continuum, right? There's also like, how big are the fitness costs or benefits? And there's also situations where something is more or less neutral. So yeah, excellent question in the chat. Where would you put grooming? Like if it's just a one-time thing, you can answer in the chat, like it's one-off grooming interaction. Where do you think it would fall? Any ideas? So yeah, I think it's in the top row. I agree. I think a one-off is altruistic because it costs the actor some time. But that's not a fitness cost, that's a time cost. And maybe that's a fitness cost in the long run. But in reality, grooming relationships in these social systems are often reciprocated, right? I groom you, and then tomorrow you groom me. And so those reciprocated relationships are cooperative. Oh, and Floor, really good point. Maybe they eat the bugs. So maybe the groomer gets a little snack out of it. So the groomer spends some time, but gets a benefit of some material resources. So that would be cooperative, even if it's a one-off. So, right. So good points in the chat, like they're developing a bond, and maybe that bond has other benefits to the actor later on. So it's really like something that might look altruistic if you just limit yourself to a snapshot of the behavior, might not be in the bigger picture. So yeah, it's these are useful theoretical categories, but the real world is complicated. Okay, so the adaptationist paradigm. So if the following premises are true, if a population has variation among individuals in a trait, which may include behavioral traits. So if there's differences among individuals and let's say how groomy they are, some individuals like to groom more than others. And if that behavior or trait has a heritable genetic basis, so if these differences in groominess have some genetic cause, then, and if that variation is also linked to differences in fitness outcomes, meaning differences in survival and or reproductive success that depend on the trait in question. So if like the individuals that do more grooming are somehow better off in other ways, maybe they're more likely to attract a mate, then we expect natural selection to act on that behavioral trait. And that is adaptation. So adaptation by natural selection is the process by which traits in a population change over time as a result of those three premises. Oops. Okay. So those are the definitions here. And some of the big questions we have in social evolution under this paradigm of being interested in adaptation are, what is the adaptive value of social behavior? How, when, and why did sociality evolve? Now, this can be difficult to study because behaviors can have had genetic variation that changed in the population in the past, and there's no, the trait is there now, but it no longer varies. So we can't study its heritable basis if everybody's been selected to have the trait. Okay, and we're also interested in what evolutionary processes explain the differences in social systems that we see today. We'll see a bit of that in the coming slides. And also, what are the consequences of social behavior for evolution and biodiversity? Oops, okay, so we'll start off with our first video clip. So the next section of this lecture, we're going to get into the kinds of social systems and how variable they can be.
When the sun goes down, it emerges from the deep. El Diablo Rojo, the Red Devil, also known as the Humboldt squid. Tonight, an army of them rises from the deep to hunt. Up to 1,000 strong, each one can grow as long as a person and weigh up to 100 pounds. Surprisingly intelligent, they communicate with each other by flashing messages with their skin. The messages are received with eyes the size of billiard balls. Ten limbs lined with hooks and suction cups drag victims to their raptor-like beak. These squid show no mercy, even for their own relatives. They're cannibals.
Okay. Yeah, isn't that a dream job if you could be the narrator for these things? I picked this video because most large cephalopods, like giant squid, big octopuses, are apparently solitary, but these Humboldt squid live in these schools of many individuals. And I think they are actually dangerous to humans. I think I remember reading that, but I forget why. Yeah, I'll have to look that up after. And you can, if the video didn't come through the Zoom, the links, I tried to put the links in so you can watch them on your own. Okay, so and here's a picture of a giant squid and a flock or a school of Humboldt squid. Pretty scary. Think of swimming with that. So they're known to attack humans. Yeah, I read something about that when I taught the course a couple of years ago. Okay, so okay, so just a few kind of definitions. We're going to use group to refer to just an aggregation of individuals in space and time. A social group means a group of individuals that are socially attracted to one another. So you can think of a group could exist because of like an attraction to some resource, right? A group around a watering hole, or a group of humans around a lineup for rapid tests or something. But social group means that they're attracted to each other. A social system or society is a group of conspecifics, that means same species, that interact with one another more often than they do with other social groupings. Okay, so this is a bird. This is actually the nest system of a bird. The species name is sociable weaver, and you've got the Latin name there. And this is what they build, these like crazy nests that houses hundreds of individuals. So it's a group. The birds that live there are a group. It's a social group, and it's also a society. One more term is sociality, which just means the extent to which the animals in some population associate in social groups. You can also think of it as referring to gregariousness. So these sociable weavers are very social. Okay, how are groups formed? Well, we can think kind of abstractly and say that based on the adaptationist paradigm, we assume that natural selection will favor the evolution of social groups when the fitness benefits of being attracted to other individuals are greater than the fitness costs. And one of the readings from this week highlighted how this process of coming together with others is part of a lot of important transitions in the history of life. And I'm not an expert on these kind of transitions, but it's really incredible to think about them. Like, we wouldn't be here today if not for these really key events in the history of the earth, right? Where like chemicals replicating themselves in the ocean came together inside a membrane, and that became a cell enclosing a genome. Prokaryotic cells became eukaryotic cells through the process of engulfing another individual. And that's how we got our mitochondria and how plants got their chloroplasts. Asexual cells became sexual cells, cells that required coming together with another individual to reproduce. Unicellular organisms became multicellular organisms. No animal life would be here today if not for that key event, which was talked about in one of the readings. And solitary individuals became social groups and societies. And also in ecology, species that don't interact become mutualisms with other species. So this kind of idea of coming together and benefiting from interactions is something that defines a lot about life. Okay, so abstractly, what does this process look like? Well, if we imagine a distribution of individuals in space and time, you could start with something that is not clumped. So either a uniform distribution, which means that individuals are well spaced, or a random distribution. And how do we go from there to there, this clumped distribution? Well, individuals might be attracted to each other, or individuals might be attracted to resources or habitats, which can indirectly generate social clumping as a byproduct. And both of these above processes can result in the evolution of a social system, like whether the individuals came together to be with each other originally, or whether they came together to be with a resource and then indirectly sociality evolved. Either way, it can happen. Okay, so we see a great diversity of types of social systems across animals, and that's a major focus of this course, but I wanted to highlight on the other side that social evolution applies to other kinds of things, not just animals. But in animals, we have a range of things from animals that largely live on their own, but come together for mating. We have animals that live in temporary groups where the membership in one group might be different than, like half those individuals might be off in another group if you look a day later. So the group membership is constantly fluctuating in schools of fish and flocks of birds. We also have systems where there are permanent groups like lion prides or elephant clans. I think that's the right word. I'm not totally sure. And then we have highly complex societies like chimpanzee societies or eusocial insects like bees, ants, wasps, and termites, and ourselves. So we'll delve into these examples in the next few slides. So Nev asks a good question in the chat. Since all animals need to come together to mate, does that mean that all animals would be considered social to a degree? Yeah, absolutely. Right. So actually, it's not true that all animals need to come together to mate. There are some animals that reproduce asexually, but it's really, really rare. And interestingly, there's even some animals that reproduce asexually, but come together socially to initiate that process. So, but yes, I agree, like mating. Well, and I guess sorry, I should say, there are some mating systems where it doesn't even require contact between the individuals. There's like salamanders where the male deposits a package of sperm and a female comes along and picks it up later. So contact is not always required, but that's still like a dimension of their sociality, right? They're doing the mating without actually coming into contact. But I agree, like sociality is a continuum. So, okay, so getting into these types of systems a little bit more. So temporary groups, you'll often see them called fission fusion, which means like fission means separating, fusion means coming back together. So the idea is that these are groups where group membership is open, like anyone could join at any time. That's what open means. It's highly dynamic. So like who's in the group is changing and reforming. Anonymous, kind of a weird way to say that because it's not as though like we don't think starlings in a flock, no one thinks they have names for each other. But the point is that membership in that flock isn't based on some long running familiarity. And there can be a lot of variation within the individuals in the flock of how familiar they are with each other. Maybe there's some individuals in there that have been mates in the past or family members, but others that have like never encountered each other before. Okay, another quick video here. I think this one's about ostriches.
The ostrich, the largest living bird, can weigh almost 300 pounds. He presides over his harem and digs several nest holes in the desert soil. But his chief hen, his favorite, gets to choose where she lays her eggs. And once she does, the serious business of egg laying begins. Ostriches lay the biggest eggs. A single one can weigh more than 3 pounds. And she'll lay up to 12 of them. But that's just the start. The other females in the harem will lay their eggs in her nest as well. Being the designated egg sitter for the harem doesn't ruffle the chief hen's feathers because she has a plan. Each gleaming egg, with as much nutrition as about 24 chicken eggs, is a treasure for a hungry predator. And the chief hen isn't about to sacrifice any of hers. She rolls her eggs to the middle of the nest and those of the other females to the edge.
Okay, so ostriches live in these groups where the membership is changing over time, but it's more complex than a flock. It has structure, it has dominance ranks, and that's what the video was talking about a little bit. There's one male, a territorial male, with numerous females in this group, and only one of the female is the kind of major female, the most important one, and she ends up being the one who incubates the eggs for the other female, providing them with a service. All right, so that gets into our next kind of type of social system, permanent groups. So I don't think the ostrich groups are permanent, but they're getting more complicated than like the temporary groups like those flocks, right? So permanent groups is where group membership is closed. Group membership is relatively stable. It's often a family group or a breeding group. Individuals recognize each other as opposed to the anonymous thing. And there's usually strong bonds, strong repeated social associations between individuals in this group. And there's often structured like dominance hierarchy within these permanent groups. And even if the ostrich groupings weren't permanent, they had that kind of structure as well. Okay, so we've got another video here about hyena societies.
The spotted hyena has a reputation for being a sinister, thieving scavenger. This is utter nonsense. We have come to know hyenas as affectionate, intelligent, and resourceful. Hyenas live in matriarchal clans centered on a den. It's like a female-dominated village where the cubs play and learn their social place under the protection of a queen and her subjects. Young cubs are cute but scrappy and tough. Hyenas are born into a rigid hierarchy, and their social status never changes. Males are the bottom of the social pile. Sometimes they loiter around the den, but mostly they forage away from the mums and kids.
Look at how submissive that sub-adult is to a cub less than half its size. Look at the dominance being displayed by the cubs with their tails up in the air.
As with all animals, there is a chilling side to the hyena because they are viciously territorial and there is no mercy for those who challenge the hierarchy. Although our clan of spotted hyenas continues to challenge their reputation as devious scavengers, we are often reminded why they are one of the most feared predators of the African wild. If you enjoy that little taste of Africa, click subscribe here on top of this baboon's skull.
Okay, so hyena societies are highly nepotistic. So, and what that means is that the rank of a mother is inherited by her offspring. So like the dominant females will have offspring that will kind of inherit her social position, her social relationships. So that's really interesting and maybe similar to humans. Okay, so this is another example of a complicated social system, a multi-tiered society of the Hamadryas baboon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So these baboons have, a male will have a group of females that they live with. So that's at the lowest level of the diagram here, one male unit, but they will, these small mating groups might combine with other groups to form a clan, and clans might combine to form a band, and bands might combine to form a troop. So I think troops are when you have aggregations of hundreds of these baboons. And they might move around between resources in this kind of troop situation, but they can, like the bands and clans and units can split off and reform at different times. So it's thought to be this kind of multi-level or tiered system. Okay, so that leads into complex societies. So there's many examples where there's highly structured social systems. Group membership is probably closed in these super complex societies, but not necessarily. And group size can be very large in these complex societies, like colonies of the thousands or millions. There's often cooperation in these systems. So I think we can think of human cities as counting under complex societies here. But also things like chimpanzee social groups and ant, bee, wasp, and termite colonies as well, which we're going to get into with our next video. Those societies are called eusociality. Okay, so let's watch one more video. I think this might be the last one. Introducing eusociality.
The army ant. This may look like a ball of 1 million individuals, but make no mistake, the colony acts as one. A superorganism with a sensory system of 2 million antennae. A skeleton made from the living bodies of workers. A defense system of soldier ants, ready to act at any sign of danger. A digestive system processing piles of food deep inside. Even a coordinated system for dealing with all the waste. These are insects that, by working together, transcend individual size. The colony can search the entire jungle and flush out its wildlife. Each day, it sends out a silent probe into the forest in quest of food. It doesn't use scouts like other ants. Instead, a vast search party pushes into virgin territory. Seeking out the signs of anything alive. They spread out along a 10-meter front, sweeping across the forest floor. To find prey, the ants must first touch it. The irony is that this, the most successful hide-and-seek player in the forest, is almost completely blind. It distinguishes the living only by their movement. As long as an animal remains still, it is safe. But the slightest twitch will give it away. Within seconds, the prey is pinned down. Within minutes, it's torn apart at its joints. The more the prey struggles, the more the ants engage. Right across the raid front, prey of all sizes are driven from their hiding places. Even wasps must abandon their homes when the ants arrive. Everything alive in the path of the raiders, overwhelmed by sheer numbers.
That's pretty incredible. So my colleagues who study birds in places where these army ants live, when you're putting up nets to catch birds, you have to make sure the nets are well off the ground, because a bird in a net can be killed by a team of army ants. Yeah. Okay, so eusociality. So this is from the Wikipedia definition. It's thought to be the highest level of organization. Highest is kind of a loose term, but maybe the most complex. And it's defined by the following characteristics. That individuals care for other individuals' offspring, so cooperative brood care, overlapping generations within a colony, and a division of labor into reproductive and non-reproductive groups. So in these ant colonies, there's like a queen who's reproducing, and many worker ants, or ants that have different roles, division of labor into different roles, but those individuals are not reproducing. Okay, so that's what this describes. So those different specialized roles within a eusocial society are called castes. Eusociality is distinguished from other social systems because individuals that are in one caste often can't do the other roles. And oh, okay, it's on the next slide. So I'm gonna go ahead and then I'll come back. And often this includes extreme morphological specialization. So like a single ant species, a single colony, you'll have individuals that like vary in size by, orders of magnitude, depending on their role. There'll be soldier individuals whose role is defense that are like 10 or more times bigger than like the foraging individuals. So we've got on this slide a B, we've got workers at the top, sub-soldiers, middle right, so that's here, soldiers, middle left, I don't know what the difference is. I guess the soldiers maybe have bigger mouth parts or something. And then this is the wingless queen. So there's this incredible specialization. They all have the same genome, but this genome is able to produce these different morphologies. It's thought that, so I'll go back a slide now and we'll look at like the distribution of, oh, I can't, how do I go back? There we go. Distribution of eusociality in insects. It's evolved a whole bunch of times. So it's common in, I think it's all termites, and in bees, wasps, and ants, Hymenoptera, it's evolved numerous times. So down at the bottom, it's evolved, I thought to have evolved about 10 times. And it's in other insect orders as well. So there's some eusocial beetles and thrips or something like that. So those details are described here. But once it evolves, it's rarely lost. And so one hypothesis is that that might be because once you evolve these like morphological differences, it's very difficult to go back to solitary living. So however, there's a few times where that appears to have happened in bees, where eusociality has evolved and then been lost in some lineages. But it's never been reversed from like the kind of extreme state of a huge complex colony. It's always been something sort of primitively eusocial that then goes back to solitary living. Okay. So there's a eusocial mammal, at least one, or actually I think there's a couple within the group of naked mole rats. I think there's a couple of species. So this is a mammal that lives in colonies that range in size from 20 to 300 individuals, on average about 75. There's one female queen. She's the only one who reproduces in the colony, and 1 to 3 males that are her mates. And the rest of the colony function as workers. They work to like dig the chambers and find the food and care for the offspring that will form like new workers. And so these non-reproducing workers do cooperative brood care. They care for the pups. Keep them warm, groom them, feed them. And the workers are actually sterile. They're reproductively suppressed by like their own hormones and the hormones of the queen. And people have been studying how this works. And what happens is if you remove the queen from a colony, one of the non-reproducing females will take over and kind of take on the morphology and hormonal phenotype of a queen and become sexually active, and then suppress the others. And also it's in other groups as well. So this is a snapping shrimp from the genus Synalpheus, and these are aquatic eusocial organisms, and they live in sponges. And eusociality has apparently evolved at least 3 times in this group of shrimp. And it's thought to have potentially evolved because of their sponge living. Like there's a lot of competition for these sponge habitats. And I guess the hypothesis is that might have led to eusociality. It also seems that a style of living with your close kin is part of the prerequisite for eusociality evolving. Okay. So some people have proposed that humans are eusocial, and I'm interested to hear what you all think in the chat, or if anybody wants to come on and make a case why humans are or why they aren't. And if you look back at the definition again, it was like, well, let me go back on my other screen here. So individuals caring for other individuals' offspring, overlapping generations within a colony, a complex colony, and division of labor into these specialized roles. If you look at what we do, like we live in these cities where we couldn't exist without like I couldn't live without all of the people who are producing food, building houses, all these other roles, right? That I can't do myself, but like we're all surviving because of other individuals. And we don't have the same like extreme there are many people who don't reproduce, so we do have reproductive and non-reproductive individuals, but we don't have like one queen who's doing all the reproducing. But I think of like the school system as being a really important part of that, right? It's like we have people whose role it is to care for our offspring. Yeah, so Nev was saying like we don't fulfill the definition of like these limited number of reproductive individuals. Okay, so Rami says that humans are eusocial because we have parental time off. We send our children to public schools where other people take care of them. Yeah. So, and right, in humans, reproducing is an individual decision. It's not highly controlled by suppression or hormones or like morphologies where once we have them, we can't go back. So maybe a case could be made that we're on the way, right? So there's definition we have, but there's, evolution has, there's kind of steps along the way, and we're kind of like somewhere along that continuum. Okay, so just a quick aside, to give you an application. Here, one more interesting point from Nev. Yeah, like there's different political systems, some of which are maybe more towards eusociality than others. Right, like there's places and times where reproduction has been controlled. Yeah, that's an interesting point too. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I agree with all 3 of you. It's like it's not exactly the same as like a queen in a mole rat colony or something like that, but it is, like, governments are an example of how our social system is really complex, and we really depend on specialization and kind of formalized ways of having rules for what people in the system are allowed to do. Okay. All right. So quick aside, application of eusociality. This is really interesting. So there's a lot of research on how pesticides are affecting insects that we rely on for food production, like honeybees. So the honeybees that we have here are actually introduced. They're like the European honeybee. But there's many, many species of native bees, like bees that evolved in North America that like our forests and rely on for pollination and things like that. So most research is done on this one species of bee, but these other species of bees are very important as well to all of ecology. And interestingly, it's been found that these pesticides have more negative effects on smaller colonies. So small, like bees that are less social or live in a smaller group, are less able to withstand or buffer themselves from the effects of pesticide. And so these are data from an experiment where the researchers manipulated the amount of pesticide, IMD, on different bees that were put in experimentally into different colony sizes. So I'm just trying to see what I can make sense of from this graph. So the blue color is like the highest concentration of the pesticide. And then we've got 3 different colony sizes here. So at least in honeybees, it doesn't look like there's obviously like more pesticide is worse. There's more death, there's more empty cells with greater pesticide amounts. In honeybees, there's not maybe a big difference between these 3 different colony sizes, but it's been shown that in other bees that are more solitary, it's particularly bad to be in a small colony. So there's a lot of mechanisms that might help buffer the negative effects. Like maybe not every individual in a big colony is needed all the time, right? So if some individuals are unwell, the other individuals can pick up the slack. Okay, so this is just making the same point here. Okay, so sociality can vary a lot between different species that are closely related. So let's just look at a few examples of that on the next few slides. So even though different species of cats are all within the clade of cats, they can vary a lot in their sociality. So it's this very evolvable trait. And so here's a slide with some examples of cat species that are solitary. They come together to mate, of course, and they often have some degree of parental care where the offspring might stick with their mothers for some years. But when you see them, they're largely a solitary individual. But then there's other species of cats like cheetahs and lions that live in these permanent social groups and are cooperative hunters. Here's another series of examples from African ungulates. So we have ungulates that largely live solitary lives, either alone or in a group of 2. We have ungulates like the impala that live, a territorial male will have a group of females, so they have these kind of medium group sizes. And then we have these ungulates that live in these tremendous herds, like thousands of individuals of buffalo, for example. And a third example, non-human primates. So this graph is showing you group sizes for 6 different primate species. And I just want you to notice that the scale along the x-axis here is actually a log scale. So the difference between the capuchin in pink here is actually way more than that it appears, and that's because the group size is so much bigger, you couldn't fit it on the same scale. So we have primates that live in groups of 60, and then we have primates that live solitarily, and they're all within the same lineage and related to each other. Okay, and social behavior can also vary a lot within a given species. So there's many species that live largely on their own for much of the year, but come together for breeding, often in large groups, or in these 3-spine sticklebacks, when they're juveniles, when they're recently hatched as fry, they live in shoals, they live in groups, and that probably provides protection from predation when they're small. But when they become adults, they're not clustering in groups anymore. And an example from birds, there's many bird species that in the non-breeding season, you'll find in these huge flocks of hundreds of thousands of individuals. And yet when you look at them in the breeding season, so you can find red-winged blackbirds very abundant in Ontario, starting early in the spring, but you'll find them in small groups. So there's like a male who owns a territory and he'll often have multiple mates. Okay, and this is just one last clip of really cool social behavior that you can see here in Ontario. If you go out and find a pond in May late at night, like well after sundown, you can hear chorusing frogs. And this clip shows a couple of different species of frogs, but the dominant one you hear is the spring peeper, and they're really, really small. They're really easy to hear, but they're hard to find and see. They're very tiny. So you're still hearing peepers, so you're seeing wood frogs now. And I think you're probably hearing other kinds of frogs as well. So they are like this one time of year at night, the males all descend on these ponds and call, trying to attract a mate. And if you, so it'll be like sometimes hundreds of thousands of individuals at these mating aggregations, but come back in a few weeks later and they're on their own. Okay, so before we get it, we're going to start the activity now, but I just wanted to put this slide in here to remind you of what's happening next week. Oh, okay, and any questions before we get into the discussion and breakout room stuff? Okay, not hearing or seeing any, so I'll stop recording.